How to use the fighting type in Generation Jumble. Now, for those of you who saw the first Generation Jumble Council meeting, you'll know that I predicted that the bug type would be underwhelming, and luckily I was wrong about that. But I also predicted that the fighting type would be pretty standard, in the sense that it would be mostly fair, nothing would be relatively broken outside of Sneasler. It would just be a good type with strong benefits and some weaknesses. And when it comes to Sneasler, I explained in a different video, but I was definitely wrong about Sneasler being too strong for Gen 1 OU. With Dire Claw gone, Poison Jab is nowhere near as bad. And while one Pokemon has definitely risen above the ranks more than all of the others, for the most part, I'm gonna say that I was probably right about the fighting types. They have a good niche, they're very strong, and they might be part of the reason why there's debatably now a Big 5 rather than a Big 3, as well as the rise of Alakazam. But I definitely don't think that they are super broken. Even the best one, who I would say is probably a must-have, which is weird to say, but it's just how it goes sometimes. I think overall, the fighting type is probably stronger than the bug type, even though I feel like I have been seeing more of the bugs, but a part of that is definitely people just using mono bug. It's hard to say if they're better than the dragon types. I don't think so. I think Gudra and the Gonadel are definitely better individually, but someone like Iron Hands, I definitely think it's just a better Pokemon as a whole. So I don't know, it's hard to tell. We have 5 fighting types to go over: Niape, Iron Hands, Sneasler, Minshao, and Zamazenta. Starting off with the Niape, and for those of you who remember, Niape was used in Generation Jumble Season 1, and it was so unbelievably mid. It had nothing to do in the tier where you had Sceptile and Metagross and some other very random Pokemon. And it definitely didn't help that Hisuian Zoroark was there. Hisuian Zoroark basically made this guy completely irrelevant, as well as Gengar. But luckily, it is a very different story for Season 2, because fighting Ghost is an absolutely amazing typing. This typing allows it to quad resist bug, it allows it to resist poison, it also allows it to be immune to both normal and fighting, and that fighting immunity is actually relevant now. So Niape is just so much better than it was in Season 1, and that's great to hear. And when it comes to its stats, they're overall just very solid. He's pretty bulky, pretty fast, hits hard, but he does suffer a lot from not having a boosting move. Like, Zamazenta is a little bit of a weirdo, but these 3 guys here all have Swords Dance, which allows them to get a lot of damage in. Meanwhile, Niape has to rely on hitting something super effectively, which is definitely not very consistent. In fact, it's been so bad that something that I see a lot is people using Screech. You know it's bad when this is the best thing you have going for you. So, I think Niape sets can be very versatile, but it's mostly because the moves themselves are not super great, always compared to how broken everything else is. Body Slam is always consistent damage, Hyper Beam can help you just finish off a KO, Low Kick for normals, I guess. Rock Slide is, outside of the rock types, you're probably the best user of Rock Slide, but a lot of that is just because you don't have a good boosting move, and since you kind of need to hit stuff super effectively. I don't really like Screech personally. I think Hyper Beam, Low Kick, Rock Slide, and Rest is the set I would usually go for, but people have definitely used some very different stuff, and it ended up working alright for them. And I've used Thunderbolt a few times, but it's eh. Now, by far, the best Pokemon for this tourney or not for this tourney, but for the fighting types, is Iron Hands. This guy is by far the most used, one of the most used Pokemon in the format so far. And I think he's one of the Pokemon that should be considered for the Big 5, which I will probably make its own video on. But even though like the Big 5 is very good, Iron Hands is the only new Pokemon, which is interesting because of how good the Gonadel is, or some of the other Pokemon added. But Iron Hands basically is the reason Snorlax is in the Big 5, because for all intents and purposes, with these stats, he is definitely a much better Snorlax. Doesn't have normal stab, nor does he have amnesia or self-destruct. But in practice, people would just rather use Iron Hands. He is by far the bulkiest Sword Stance user, which definitely gives him a huge niche. But he also has Low Kick for the normal types, he has Earthquake, Hyper Beam. The most standard set usually replaced with Low Kick, and most people definitely just go for Rest. So going for a Rest, Earthquake, Sword Stance, Hyper Beam set, and this is already pretty good. I will say, from replays that I've seen, people are a little too quick to use Sword Stance, and by that, I mean people mostly use it at the beginning of the game, but that's not good, because often I'll see someone use a Sword Stance, maybe even two, putting Iron Hands in max attack, then they'll KO a Pokemon, only for their opponent to switch in an Alakazam, or just something fast that can take it out. Sword Stance is a very powerful tool, but unless you have something fast like Sneasler, which we'll get into very shortly, it's just not good unless it's like against a paralyzed Chansey, or just something that's low, or just at late in the game, when there's not much that can stand up to it. Even so, Iron Hands also has some other sets too. I think that Thunder is a pretty good set on it. With 50 base special, it actually does pretty decent damage, especially against Starmie or any of the waters, which is the main reason you're using it in the first place. It can, also just in general, if you don't know what they're switching into, and if you're assuming it's probably going to be a physical tank, Thunder could always be used just to hit something for a surprise special damage, and there's a good chance of paralysis. There's also Body Slam on Iron Hands, but that I'm going to say is not very good, because even with Sword Stance, Body Slam doesn't do enough damage as you would want. You would much rather use Hyper Beam or Earthquake, and Low Kick is mostly just for the normal types for the most part, and for the Foot Chance, which could help you do a little bit better against Rhydon, although it's definitely a very risky matchup. But all in all, Iron Hands is still a fantastic Pokemon, and one that I would definitely recommend if you're just new to Generation Jumble. Speaking of which, you should definitely join the Discord so you can participate in Generation Jumble. We have a tournament that's going to be happening very soon, and we're also going to be having a link to the server where you can participate in that. There's also going to be a doc for the Generation Jumble hub, where you can just learn all the information you could ever want about this season. Not sure I was brain so much on that. But now let's get on to Sneasler, the Pokemon who I thought was going to be Ubers, but then ended up being fine. The reason why this is the case is because it's more than just Alakazam existing. Another reason is that with Pokemon like the Gonadel, which are faster than Sneasler, like a Pokemon like this can definitely revenge kill. But just in general, Poison's a lot better than most of us were expecting. And because of that, that just means that Sneasler just isn't hitting everything as hard as it normally would be. It's still a great Pokemon. A+ tier, maybe even S. But it's not like there's nothing that can switch into its attacks anymore. But still, I think that's definitely a good thing, because it'll be a lot more fun if we can actually keep Sneasler in the format. And it's definitely still a very dangerous Pokemon. One that has definitely lost me a few games, and other people as well. But for the love of God, I've seen this at least twice. Don't use it as a lead Toxic Spikes user. The most popular set I've seen for Sneasel is Sword Stance, Poison Jab. You have Low Kick, mostly just for the normals, and Hyper Beam. You could use Rock Slide, but I don't think it's very good. So for the most part, this is going to be your standard set. And it's good. Keep in mind with how popular the Psychic types are, it's a little risky. You can't just switch in at any point in the game. It's even hard to get a Sword Stance up. But a Sneasel player can definitely find the opportunity. So overall, Sneasel is pretty good. Actually, I'll just say it's great. Minxiao is the fighting type that I've seen the least. And whenever I do see it, it usually ends up being in a game where the person lost and Minxiao can't contribute much. So I don't know what's really the best thing to use for Minxiao. It's still up in the air, and we're going to need more people to really experiment with it. But I do think, always hope, I'll be seeing it more in the actual tournament, because it has some merits. Because unlike all of these other fighting types, it's the only one that has high jump kick. And that alone gives it a very great niche. And even though it's not as fast as Sneasler, it's still pretty fast in its own right. Not to mention, it can hit with a hard 125 attack, which is higher than Niape. Not higher than Iron Hands, obviously, or Sneasler. And technically not higher than Zamazenta, but Zamazenta only has Slash and Hyper Beam. And again, we'll get into that. So for all intents and purposes, I believe that Minxiao, I think it has the strongest fighting move out of all of them. Because even with Low Kick or even Submission from a Niape, I'm pretty sure with a base 85 high jump kick, it's going to be hitting harder than anything else against the normal types. Which that alone is already pretty neat. But it also has Sword Stance, and it also has like Hyper Beam, obviously. But for the last move, I think it's mainly between either Rock Slide or Reflect. Rock Slide could help you against flying types, but I'm going to be honest, Zapdos isn't like that. Okay, Zapdos isn't bad, but it's not like you're going to see it so much to where you want to use Rock Slide for coverage. So in practice, I think Reflect is going to be a lot better, because Reflect allows it to do significantly better against physical attackers, such as the normal types. Not to mention with the other fighting types, especially with them having Sword Stance, Reflect could be used to help you survive at least one extra attack from them. Against Sneasler, that probably doesn't do much, but with High Jump Kick, you can do decent damage to Iron Hands, I would imagine. So, not used a lot, and I imagine by the time we get to the second tournament, it could fall to Yu. But in general, I think Minxiao is good. Just need more people to test it out. And last but not least, we have Zamazenta. Zamazenta definitely is the weirdest out of all of them, because it has no fighting step at all. But what it does do, it does very well. Zamazenta, like I said, only has Slash and Hyper Beam for attacking moves, which definitely sucks. However, it makes up for that for having by far the best stats in the format. Keep in mind, even though it says base 80 special here, it's still using its special defense, which is, I believe, 115, just like its normal defense. That's already bulky. Being 138 means you're the fastest relevant Pokemon in the tier, even faster than Jolteon, Crobat, or Aerodactyl. Not to mention, with those high stats, the main way people use Zamazenta is with Reflect. Because with Reflect and Rest, you are just completely unkillable. And keep in mind, we're already going over 3 Sword Stance users here. So you can probably already see why just having a 115 defense with Reflect is just huge. Zamazenta can easily stall out all of the other fighting types here, besides Niape. It loses extremely hard against the ghost types, but that's not very much of a bad thing, because obviously there's more than one Pokemon for a team, and I think with how great Psychic types are in this gen, it makes a lot of sense that the fighting types, even ones like Zamazenta, don't have too much of a hit to their playability because of the existence of ghost types. Because almost every single team can guarantee that they can threaten the ghosts with super effective psychic damage. It's not like a Niape or especially Gengar can hurt the psychic types either. Which means Zamazenta here can just do what it does pretty well. I don't think Reflect is worth it, because not only are psychic types just naturally have high crit rates, but also with special drops, it won't take long for you to have your white screen be completely invalidated. So just use Zamazenta as an answer to the Sword Stance users. And there's also more than just the fighting types. There's also Armaldo, and I'm sure there are some others, even if stuff like Kingor haven't been tested yet. So there we go. That is the fighting type. So far, I think they have a pretty good spot in the meta. And I think with some things like Minshao could be explored more. But overall, seems like they're going to be having a pretty good place. And it's nice to see them do that. So that's about it. I hope you guys get to play more in Generation Jumble. You still have time to set up for a tournament if you want. But until next time, this is Groundback, and I look forward to hearing from you.